Natalie Harper stood before her bathroom mirror, applying mascara with trembling hands. The invitation to Trevor Ashton's spring charity gala sat on her dresser, mocking her with its gold-embossed lettering. 3 months had passed since Trevor had ended their engagement. Tonight would be the first time she'd see him since that awful day when he'd told her she simply wasn't sophisticated enough for his world. Her best friend Rachel had begged her not to go. But when Trevor personally called to extend the invitation, claiming he wanted to show everyone they could be mature about their breakup, Natalie had foolishly believed him. She wanted to prove she'd moved on, that she was strong enough to face him without falling apart. The midnight blue dress she'd chosen hugged her figure elegantly. She'd saved for months to afford it, determined to look her absolute best. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and the simple pearl earrings her grandmother had given her completed the look. Taking a deep breath, Natalie grabbed her clutch and headed out into the night. Entering the Lion's Den, Ashton Estate sprawled across 3 acres of prime real estate. Its Georgian architecture, a testament to old money and inherited privilege. As Natalie's taxi pulled up to the circular driveway, she watched other guests arrive in luxury cars, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, making her feel suddenly underdressed despite her careful preparations. The grand ballroom took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors that reflected like mirrors. White roses and orchids adorned every surface, and a string orchestra played classical music from a raised platform. Waiters glided through the crowd carrying champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. Everything screamed wealth and exclusivity. Natalie accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, hoping the alcohol would calm her nerves. She recognized many faces from her time with Trevor, people who'd once pretended to welcome her into their circle.
Oh.
Now their glances ranged from curious to pitying to outright hostile. She heard whispers as she passed, felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. The performance begins. Trevor materialized from the crowd like a shark, sensing blood in the water. He looked impeccable in his custom tuxedo, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced and cold. He approached with a glass of scotch in hand. Several people nearby turned to watch their interaction with barely concealed interest. "Natalie, how wonderful that you could make it," Trevor said loudly enough for others to hear. His tone dripped with false warmth. "I'm so glad you felt comfortable enough to attend. It shows real character." Before Natalie could respond, he'd already turned to greet someone else. Leaving her standing alone in the middle of the glittering crowd, her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to smile and make her way toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. She could survive this. She just needed to stay for an hour, show her face, and then escape with her dignity intact. The evening crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Natalie made polite conversation with a few acquaintances, endured sympathetic looks from people she barely knew, and tried to ignore the way Trevor kept glancing in her direction with that smug expression she'd once mistaken for confidence. Speech that shattered her just as Natalie was planning her exit. Trevor stepped onto the small stage where the orchestra had been playing. He tapped his champagne glass with a spoon, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him as he smiled that charming smile that had once made Natalie's heart race. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this important cause," Trevor began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "Before we continue with the evening's festivities, I'd like to share something personal with you all. Something I hope will inspire others who might be facing similar challenges." Natalie's stomach dropped. Around her, guests leaned in with interest, sensing drama about to unfold. "Some of you may remember that I was engaged not too long ago," Trevor continued, his eyes finding Natalie in the crowd. "I came very close to making what would have been the biggest mistake of my life. You see, I nearly married someone who simply wasn't prepared for the responsibilities that come with being part of this family, this community." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Natalie felt her hands begin to shake, champagne sloshing. In her glass? "She had such dreams, such aspirations," Trevor said, his tone dripping with mockery. "She thought that working at a museum and painting in her spare time was somehow equivalent to the work we do here. She thought that love and good intentions were enough to bridge the gap between her simple background and the expectations of this world. It was almost adorable, really, like watching a child play dress-up in her mother's clothes. The laughter grew louder. Natalie felt her face flush hot with humiliation. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her feet seemed rooted to the marble floor. Around her, the faces of the guests blurred together into a sea of judgment and amusement. The mysterious stranger. I learned an important lesson from that experience. Trevor continued, raising his glass higher. Not everyone is meant for greatness. Some people, no matter how hard they try, will always be exactly what they were born to be. Ordinary, average, forgettable. The words hung in the air like a slap. Natalie's vision swam with unshed tears. She refused to cry, refused to give them that satisfaction. But as Trevor's cruel words echoed in her mind, she felt something inside her begin to crack. That's when she noticed him. A man stood near the bar, watching the scene unfold with an expression of barely contained fury. He was tall and striking, with dark hair and sharp features that suggested mixed heritage. Unlike the other guests who seemed entertained by Trevor's cruelty, this man's jaw was clenched tight, his hands gripping the edge of the bar with white-knuckled intensity. Their eyes met across the room, and Natalie saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Recognition, not of her specifically, but of the situation, the pain, the humiliation. He understood what she was feeling because he'd been there himself. Before she could process what was happening, the man set down his glass and began walking toward her. His strides were purposeful and confident, cutting through the crowd like a ship through water. Conversations fell silent in his wake. Even Trevor paused mid-sentence, noticing the disturbance. The man reached Natalie and stopped directly in front of her. Up close, she could see the intensity in his dark eyes, the slight furrow between his brows that suggested both concern and determination. The kiss that changed everything. I apologize for interrupting, the man said, his voice deep and clear enough for those nearby to hear. But I cannot stand by and watch this continue. He turned to face Trevor, who stood on the stage with a confused expression that was rapidly transforming into irritation. You speak of maturity and growth, the man continued, addressing Trevor directly, yet you demonstrate neither. C is an insecure man trying to make himself feel larger by diminishing someone else. That's not strength, that's cowardice. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. No one spoke to Trevor Ashton that way, especially not at his own family's charity gala. Trevor's face flushed red with anger. And who exactly are you to lecture me in my own home? My name is Cameron West, the man said calmly, though there was steel beneath the surface. I'm someone who recognizes injustice when I see it. The name clearly meant something to many of the guests. Natalie heard whispers of recognition. West, the tech entrepreneur who'd built $1 billion company. From nothing? The man who'd revolutionized online education and turned down partnerships with half the families in this room. Cameron turned back to Natalie, and his expression softened. You deserve better than this, he said quietly, meant only for her ears. You deserve better than him. Then, before Natalie could react, before anyone could anticipate what would happen next, Cameron West cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Gasps and exclamations filled the air. Somewhere, someone dropped their champagne glass, the sound of shattering crystal punctuating the moment. But Natalie heard none of it. In that instant, the world narrowed to the warmth of Cameron's lips against hers. The gentle but firm way he held her, the message his action conveyed to everyone watching. She mattered. She had value. She was not alone. When Cameron pulled back, Natalie's heart was racing. She stared at him in shock and confusion, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Cameron's eyes held hers steadily, and in them she saw no trace of mockery or manipulation. Only sincerity. Come with me, he said softly, extending his hand. You don't have to stay here and endure this. On the stage, Trevor stood frozen, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. Around them, the guests whispered frantically, their phones already emerging. To capture and share this scandalous turn of events, Natalie looked at Cameron's outstretched hand. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to question his motives, to protect her already battered heart. But something deeper, something that recognized genuine kindness, when it appeared, urged her to take a chance. She placed her hand in his. Together they walked through the stunned crowd toward the ballroom exit, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and one humiliated ex-fiancé whose carefully orchestrated evening had just been turned completely upside down. Cameron led Natalie through the ornate hallways of the Ashton mansion, past startled servers and wide-eyed guests who had spilled out from the ballroom to witness the spectacle. Her hand remained in his, warm and steady as they navigated toward the grand entrance. Behind them, the sounds of frantic conversation and Trevor's raised voice echoed through the corridors. But Cameron never looked back, and neither did Natalie. The cool night air hit her face like a splash of cold water, jolting her back to reality. They descended the marble steps together, and only when they reached the circular driveway did Cameron finally stop and release her hand. He turned to face her, his expression concerned but respectful, giving her space to process what had just happened. Natalie stared at him, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who was this man? What had possessed him to do something so bold, so public, so utterly insane? And most importantly, what did he want from her? I apologize if I overstepped, Cameron said quietly, running a hand through his dark hair. That was impulsive, but I could not stand by and watch him destroy you like that. Why? The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. You don't know me. You don't know anything about what happened between Trevor and me. Cameron's jaw tightened, and for a moment, a shadow passed across his features. I know enough. I know what it looks like when someone uses their power to humiliate another person publicly. I know because I've been on the receiving end of that particular cruelty. The confrontation before Natalie could respond, the mansion doors burst open. Behind them, Trevor stormed out, his face flushed with rage, followed by an elegant woman in her 60s, wearing a navy gown dripping with diamonds. Victoria Ashton, Trevor's mother, and the true power behind the family name, descended the steps with the grace of a queen surveying her domain. This is unacceptable, Trevor shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Cameron. You come into my home, assault my guest, and think you can just walk away. Cameron turned slowly, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. I assaulted no one. I kissed a woman who did not object. If that offends you, perhaps you should examine why. Victoria Ashton glided forward, her expression calculating as she assessed Cameron with cold precision. Mr. West, isn't it? I've heard of you. The self-made man who rejected our investment opportunities. Her smile was thin and predatory. How very noble of you to defend this girl, but surely you realize what this looks like. A publicity stunt? An attempt to embarrass my family? With respect, Mrs. Ashton, Cameron replied evenly, your family needs no help from me in that regard. Your son managed that quite effectively on his own. Trevor lunged forward, but his mother caught his arm with surprising strength. Control yourself, she hissed. Then, turning back to Cameron and Natalie, she continued in a voice like honey laced with poison. Miss Harper, I always knew you were ambitious, but this is truly impressive. First my son, now Mr. West. Tell me, what is your secret? The words struck Natalie like physical blows. She had spent the entire evening trying to maintain her composure, trying to prove she was strong enough to face them all. But Victoria's accusation, delivered with such casual cruelty, threatened to shatter what remained of her defenses. Standing ground, that is enough. Cameron's voice cut through the night like a blade. He moved to stand beside Natalie, not in front of her, but next to her, a subtle but powerful statement of solidarity. You speak of ambition and manipulation, Mrs. Ashton, but what I witnessed tonight was far worse. I saw a man so insecure in his own worth that he needed to tear down someone who once cared for him. I saw a room full of people who chose entertainment over decency. And now I see a mother who taught her son that cruelty is acceptable as long as you have money and status. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who we are, what we can do to you and your little company?" "Please try," Cameron said with a slight smile that held no warmth. "I welcome the challenge. But let me give you some advice, Mrs. Ashton. Threats only work when the person you're threatening has something to fear. I built my company from nothing. I faced bankruptcy, betrayal, and failures that would have broken lesser people. Your family's connections don't frighten me in the slightest." A sleek black car pulled up to the driveway, and a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a weathered face emerged. He approached the group with the easy confidence of someone who had navigated countless difficult situations. "Cameron, there you are," the man said, nodding politely to the Ashtons. "I apologize for the commotion. You should be going." "Benjamin," Cameron acknowledged him with relief. "Perfect timing as always." Benjamin Torres, Cameron's business partner and closest friend, took in the scene with a quick assessing glance. He had spent enough years in business to recognize a powder keg when he saw one. "The car is ready whenever you are." Trevor, who had been temporarily silenced by Cameron's words, found his voice again. "This isn't over, West. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family has connections that could destroy your company in a week." A new path forward, Cameron turned to Natalie and offered his hand once more. "Come, you deserve better than this circus." Natalie hesitated for only a moment. She looked back at Trevor and Victoria, at the mansion that represented everything she'd once thought she wanted. Then she looked at Cameron, at the genuine kindness in his eyes, and made her choice. She placed her hand in his. As they walked toward the waiting car, Victoria called after them, her voice sharp with frustration. "You're making a mistake, Mr. West. That girl is nothing but trouble. She's a social climber who will use you just like she tried to use my son." Cameron paused and looked back over his shoulder. Trying to love someone and being vulnerable enough to believe in them makes Natalie a social climber. Then I hope she climbs as high as she wants. At least she has the courage to try. Benjamin held the car door open, and Cameron gestured for Natalie to enter first. Once they were all inside and the driver had pulled away from the Ashton estate, silence filled the vehicle. Natalie sat by the window, watching the lights of the mansion disappear behind them, her mind struggling to make sense of everything that had happened in the past hour. "Where would you like us to take you?" Benjamin asked gently from the front seat, his voice kind and non-threatening. Natalie opened her mouth to give her apartment address, but Cameron spoke first. "Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk somewhere quiet, somewhere we can both breathe." He looked at Natalie with those intense dark eyes. "There's a coffee shop not far from here that stays open late. Would you be willing to join me? Promise I'll explain everything. If at any point you want to leave, Benjamin will drive you wherever you need to go. No questions asked." Coffee and confessions. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a small, warmly lit coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street. The place was nearly empty at this late hour, with only a tired barista cleaning behind the counter and one other customer absorbed in their laptop. Benjamin had elected to wait in the car, giving them privacy. Cameron wrapped his hands around a mug of black coffee. Natalie cradled a cup of chamomile tea, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy with unasked questions. "I was engaged once," Cameron finally said, his eyes fixed on his coffee. 4 years ago, her name was Vanessa Monroe. Natalie listened without interrupting, sensing that this was a story Cameron didn't tell often. "We met at a technology conference in San Francisco. I had just launched my first major product, and the company was starting to gain traction. Vanessa was brilliant, charismatic, and she seemed genuinely interested in the work I was doing, not just the money I was making." Cameron's jaw tightened. "We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Everything seemed perfect. She integrated herself into every aspect of my life, my business, my friendships, my family." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. 3 weeks before the wedding, I came home early from a business trip. I found her in our apartment with someone else. But that wasn't even the worst part. When I confronted her, she laughed. She told me I was so easy to manipulate, so desperate to be loved that I couldn't see what was right in front of my face. The wedding, the relationship, all of it had been about positioning herself to take half of everything I'd built when we divorced. Natalie felt her chest tighten with sympathy. That's horrible. I'm so sorry. Shared pain, shared understanding. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, Cameron said quietly. It was what happened after. Vanessa went to every tech publication, every business journal, every social media platform she could find. She painted herself as the victim, claimed I was controlling and emotionally abusive. She said I'd called off the wedding because she wouldn't sign a prenuptial agreement that would leave her with nothing. Many people believed her because she was charming, and I was just the quiet entrepreneur who kept to himself. How did you survive it? Natalie asked softly. Cameron met her eyes. I almost didn't. I fell into a dark place for months, questioned everything about myself, wondered if maybe she was right, if maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made me unlovable. My company nearly collapsed because I couldn't focus. I lost friends who believed her version of events, became paranoid about everyone's motives. He set down his mug. But eventually, with Benjamin's help and a lot of therapy, I realized that her cruelty said nothing about my worth. It only revealed her character. I learned that some people will always try to tear others down to build themselves up. And I promised myself that if I ever saw someone else going through what I went through, I wouldn't stand by and let it happen. Is that why you helped me tonight? Natalie asked. Because you saw yourself in my situation? Partly, Cameron admitted, but also because what Trevor did was wrong and someone needed to say so. Da-da-da-da-da. You stood there taking every cruel word with such dignity. You refused to let him see you break, even though I could tell how much it was hurting you. It takes tremendous strength. Breaking down walls, tears welled up in Natalie's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed all evening. I don't feel strong. I feel like a fool. I thought Trevor genuinely wanted to make peace tonight. I thought attending his gala would prove I'd moved on, that I was mature enough to handle seeing him again. Instead, I gave him the perfect opportunity to humiliate me in front of everyone who matters in his world. Their world, Cameron corrected gently. Not yours. You don't belong to that world, Natalie. You're better than it. You say that, but you don't know me, Natalie said, wiping at her eyes. I could be exactly what Trevor said I am. Ordinary, simple, not good enough. No. Cameron leaned forward, his expression intense. Let me tell you what I saw tonight. I saw a woman who walked into a hostile environment with her head held high. I saw someone who chose grace over retaliation, even when given every reason to lash out. I saw strength and dignity that most people in that ballroom will never possess, no matter how much money or status they accumulate. He paused, his voice softening. You're not ordinary, Natalie. You're extraordinary. And if Trevor was too blind to see that, then he lost something precious. The words settled over Natalie like a warm blanket. She wanted to believe him, but years with Trevor had left scars that went deeper than she cared to admit. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked. You kissed me in front of hundreds of people. You defended me against one of the most powerful families in the city. Don't even know me. Perhaps that's exactly why, Cameron said with a slight smile. I have no history with you, no preconceived notions or expectations. I can only see you as you are right now, in this moment. And what I see is someone worth defending. The beginning of something new. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily as they shared pieces of their lives. Natalie told Cameron about her work at the museum, about her passion for art history, and her dream of one day curating her own exhibition. She talked about her small apartment in the arts district, about Sunday morning runs through the park, about the family she'd left behind in a small town 3 hours away. Cameron shared stories about building his company from nothing, about the failures that had taught him more than any success, about his love for classical music and how playing the piano helped him think through complex problems. He talked about his younger sister Sophie, who was studying medicine in Boston, and about Benjamin, who had been his first investor and remained his closest friend. When Benjamin finally knocked gently on the coffee shop window, indicating it was well past midnight. Natalie was surprised by how disappointed she felt that the evening had to end. Cameron walked her to the car and gave the driver her apartment address. Before she could climb in, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple business card. "This has my personal number on it," he said, handing it to her. "I want you to know that tonight wasn't some grand gesture I'll forget about tomorrow. If you need anything at all, please call me, even if it's just to talk." Natalie took the card, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you, Cameron, for everything. I still don't fully understand why you did what you did, but I'm grateful." "You don't need to understand it," Cameron said with a warm smile. "Just promise me you'll stop letting Trevor Ashton define your worth. Promise me you'll remember what I told you tonight." "I promise to try," Natalie said honestly. As the car pulled away, Natalie looked back to see Cameron standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not because Cameron had swept in like some fairy tale prince to rescue her, but because he had stood beside her and reminded her of her own strength. The card he'd given her sat in her palm, warm from his touch. Natalie studied it in the dim light of the car. Beneath his name and number, there was a small quote printed in elegant script. "The stars shine brightest in the darkest night." She smiled, tucking the card carefully into her clutch. And for the first time since her engagement to Trevor had ended, Natalie Harper felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of Natalie's small apartment, pulling her from a deep sleep. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the previous night had been some strange dream. Then, she saw the midnight blue dress draped over her chair and Cameron's business card sitting on her nightstand. And reality came flooding back. She picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. Cameron West, the man who had kissed her in front of everyone, who had defended her when no one else would, who had shared his own painful story over coffee at midnight. Part of her wanted to call him immediately, but another part, the part that had been hurt too many times, urged caution. Her phone buzzed with incoming messages. Natalie braced herself, expecting gossip and questions about the previous night. Instead, she found a text from her best friend Rachel. "I heard what happened at the gala. Are you okay? Call me when you wake up. I'm bringing breakfast." True to her word, Rachel arrived 30 minutes later with bagels, coffee, and an expression that mixed concern with barely contained curiosity. Rachel Kim had been Natalie's friend since college, a fierce lawyer with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She set the food on the small kitchen table and pulled Natalie into a tight hug. "Okay, start from the beginning and don't leave out a single detail," Rachel said, settling into a chair with her coffee. "The entire city is buzzing about what happened last night." Natalie recounted the evening, from Trevor's cruel speech to Cameron's intervention to their conversation at the coffee shop. Rachel listened intently, her expression shifting from anger at Trevor to admiration for Cameron. "So let me get this straight," Rachel said when Natalie finished. "A billionaire tech entrepreneur witnessed your ex humiliating you, kissed you in front of everyone, defended you against the Ashton family, and then spent hours talking with you about life and pain and healing." She shook her head in amazement. "Natalie, this man sounds too good to be true. Doubts and decisions. That's what I'm afraid of," Natalie admitted. "What if this is just another version of what happened with Trevor? What if Cameron has some ulterior motive I can't see yet? What if I'm being naive again?" Rachel reached across the table and squeezed Natalie's hand. "Listen to me. What Trevor did to you was horrible, but you can't let one terrible relationship make you afraid of every connection. From what you've told me, Cameron was vulnerable with you. He shared his own pain. That's not the behavior of someone trying to manipulate you." "But what if I'm wrong?" Natalie whispered. "What if I get hurt again? Then you'll survive it, just like you survived Trevor," Rachel said firmly. "But Natalie, what if you're right? What if this man is exactly who he appears to be? Are you really going to let fear rob you of that possibility?" The words settled over Natalie like a challenge. She looked at Cameron's card again, at the quote about stars shining brightest in darkness. Maybe it was time to take a chance. Maybe it was time to trust herself again. "I think I need to call him," Natalie said softly. Rachel grinned. That's my girl. Now eat your bagel before it gets cold and then make that call. Reconnecting an hour later, Natalie stood by her apartment window, phone pressed to her ear, heart racing as she listened to it ring. Cameron answered on the second ring, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. Natalie, I was hoping you'd call, though I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Natalie admitted, but I wanted to thank you again for last night. And to apologize if I seemed ungrateful or suspicious. You did something incredibly kind, and I'm not sure I responded appropriately. You responded perfectly, Cameron said. You were cautious, which is exactly what you should be after what Trevor put you through. I don't expect you to trust me immediately. Trust is earned, not given. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing as easily as it had the night before. Cameron told her about his morning spent reviewing proposals for a new educational initiative his company was launching. Natalie shared her plans to visit the museum later, to catch up on work she'd missed while preparing for the gala. Would you like some company? Cameron asked. I've always loved museums, and I'd enjoy seeing where you work. But only if you're comfortable with that? I don't want to overstep. Natalie felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. I'd like that. The museum closes to the public at 5, but staff can stay later. Meet me there at 6. I'll be there, Cameron promised. The museum meeting, the Metropolitan Art Museum, stood like a temple to human creativity. Its stone facade and grand columns, speaking to centuries of cultural preservation. Natalie had worked there for 5 years. Starting as an intern and working her way up to assistant curator, the building felt like home, a place where she could lose herself in beauty and history. Cameron arrived precisely at 6, dressed casually in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look both approachable and sophisticated. Natalie met him at the staff entrance, suddenly nervous about showing him this part of her life. Welcome to my second home, she said, leading him through the quiet galleries. Most people are gone by now, so we have the place mostly to ourselves. They wandered through galleries filled with impressionist paintings, classical sculptures, and contemporary installations. Cameron asked thoughtful questions, genuinely interested in Natalie's insights about the artwork. Unlike Trevor, who had always treated her museum work as a quaint hobby rather than a real career. Cameron listened intently when she talked about the restoration process for damaged paintings or the complex negotiations involved in acquiring new pieces for the collection. This is my favorite section, Natalie said, leading him into a gallery devoted to Renaissance art. I could spend hours just sitting here, looking at the brushwork, thinking about the artists who created these pieces hundreds of years ago. Cameron stood before a painting of a night sky filled with stars, similar in theme to the quote on his business card. It's remarkable when you think about it. These artists are long gone, but their vision, their way of seeing the world lives on through their work. They achieved a kind of immortality through creation. Opening hearts, they sat on a bench in the center of the gallery, surrounded by masterpieces. The quiet intimacy of the moment felt both comfortable and charged with possibility. Can I ask you something? Natalie said. Last night you told me about Vanessa and what she did to you, but you never told me how you knew to look for me at that gala. How did you even know I would be there? Cameron smiled slightly. I was invited. By the Ashton family months ago. They've been trying to court my company for investment partnerships for years, and this was another attempt. I almost didn't go, but Benjamin convinced me it would be good for business relationships. He paused. When I saw Trevor begin that speech, I had no idea who you were. I recognized the look on your face because I'd worn that same expression for years ago. And I thought about all the people who had stood by and watched when Vanessa humiliated me, who had chosen entertainment over empathy. I promised myself I'd never be one of those people. So you risked your business relationships, your reputation, and your privacy for a complete stranger, Natalie said softly. I risked nothing that matters, Cameron replied. Business relationships, built on tolerating cruelty, aren't worth maintaining. And as for reputation, I'd rather be known for standing up for what's right than for staying silent when I should have spoken. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. Trevor used to tell me I was too emotional, too sensitive. He said I took things too personally, and that I needed to develop a thicker skin if I wanted to succeed in his world. Trevor was teaching you to accept mistreatment, Cameron said firmly. That's not strength. Real strength is maintaining your compassion and empathy even after you've been hurt. Real strength is what you showed last night when you refused to lash out or break down, even though you had every right to do both. The unexpected visitor, they were so absorbed in conversation that they didn't notice the security guard approaching until he cleared his throat. Excuse me, Miss Harper. There's someone at the main entrance asking to see you. A Mr. Trevor Ashton. He says it's urgent. Natalie felt her stomach drop. Cameron's expression darkened, but he remained calm. Do you want me to leave? He asked. Quietly, no, Natalie said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. No, I want you to stay, if you're willing. I'm not going anywhere, Cameron assured her. They made their way to the museum's main entrance, where Trevor stood in the fading evening light. He looked haggard, his usual perfect appearance marred by rumpled clothes and shadows under his eyes. When he saw Cameron standing beside Natalie, his expression hardened. I need to speak with you privately, Trevor said to Natalie, ignoring Cameron completely. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Cameron, Natalie replied. Her voice steadier than she felt. Trevor's jaw clenched. Fine, I came to apologize. What I said last night was inappropriate and hurtful. My mother has made it clear that my behavior has damaged our family's reputation, and I'm here to make amends. Your mother sent you, Natalie said. It wasn't a question. Does it matter? Trevor snapped. I'm apologizing. Isn't that what you wanted? Finding her voice, no, Trevor, it's not. Natalie felt something shift inside her, a clarity she hadn't possessed before. You're not actually sorry for what you did. You're sorry that it had consequences. You're sorry that people saw you for who you really are. But you're not sorry for the pain you caused me, because you don't actually think you did anything wrong. Trevor's face flushed. I gave you everything. I introduced you to the right people, took you to the right places, tried to help you become someone better than you were. And this is how you thank me? By making a spectacle of yourself with him? He jabbed a finger toward Cameron. You didn't try to make me better, Natalie said, her voice rising. You tried to make me smaller, criticized everything about me. My work, my interests, my background, my friends. You wanted me to be a reflection of you, not a person in my own right. And when I couldn't be what you wanted, and I couldn't erase who I was to become your perfect accessory, you punished me for it. I loved you, Trevor said, but the words sounded hollow. No, you didn't, Natalie replied. You loved the idea of molding someone into your ideal partner. But love isn't about control or manipulation or making someone feel worthless. I know that now because I've seen what real kindness looks like. I've met someone who celebrates who I am instead of trying to change me. Trevor's eyes flickered to Cameron, then back to Natalie. You barely know him. He's using you to get back at my family for rejecting his business proposals. Actually, Cameron spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. Your family has been pursuing my company for years, not the other way around. I've rejected every proposal because I don't do business with people whose values don't align with mine. And after last night, I'm more certain than ever that I made the right choice. Breaking free, this is ridiculous, Trevor said. Natalie, be reasonable. We had 3 good years together. Doesn't that count for something? It counts as a lesson learned, Natalie said. Thank you for coming by, Trevor. But I don't accept your apology because it's not genuine. I don't want your mother's attempt at damage control. What I want is for you to leave me alone so I can move forward with my life. You're making a mistake, Trevor warned. When this thing with West falls apart, and it will, don't come crying back to me. I won't, Natalie said simply. Goodbye. Trevor, she watched him leave, his shoulders tense with anger and wounded pride. When the door closed behind him, Natalie felt something release in her chest. A weight she'd been carrying for months finally lifting, Cameron put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Natalie said, turning to face him with tears of relief streaming down her face. I'm free. New beginnings. 2 months passed, and autumn gave way to early winter. Natalie stood in a small gallery space, surrounded by her own artwork. She'd finally gathered the courage to pursue her dream of painting seriously, and tonight was the opening of her first exhibition. The gallery owner, Diana Chen, had taken a chance on her after seeing some pieces Natalie had posted online. The paintings told a story of transformation. There were dark, heavy pieces from the early days after her breakup with Trevor, full of shadow and confusion. Then came transitional works, where light began to break through the darkness. And finally, the newest paintings burst with color and hope, depicting night skies where stars blazed brilliantly against the black. Cameron arrived early, as he always did, carrying a bouquet of white roses. Over the past 2 months, they'd spent countless hours together. They'd gone to concerts and coffee shops, taken long walks through the city, had deep conversations about life and dreams and fears. They'd also had their first argument, a heated discussion about whether Natalie should quit her museum job to focus on painting full-time. Cameron thought she had enough talent to succeed, while Natalie worried about financial stability. They'd worked through it, learning to respect each other's perspectives without trying to force agreement. "These are incredible," Cameron said. Studying her latest painting showed a woman standing beneath a star-filled sky, arms raised as if embracing the universe. "You've captured something powerful here. It's how I feel now," Natalie said. "Like I can finally breathe. Finally. Be myself without apology." Rachel arrived with her new girlfriend, followed by Benjamin and his wife, then Diana Chen with several potential buyers. The gallery filled with people, and Natalie found herself explaining her work, discussing technique, fielding questions from interested collectors. Several pieces sold within the first hour. Full circle, near the end of the evening. Cameron pulled Natalie aside to a quieter corner of the gallery. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," he said, his expression serious. Natalie felt a flutter of nervousness. "That sounds ominous." "It's not, I promise," Cameron said with a slight smile. "I've been thinking about something you said a few weeks ago, about how you wished there were more programs to help underprivileged children access art education. What if we made that happen?" "What do you mean?" "My company's been looking for meaningful community initiatives to support," Cameron explained. "What if we partnered with your museum and other cultural institutions to create a comprehensive art education program for kids who couldn't otherwise afford it? You design the curriculum and run the program. We'd provide the funding and logistical support." Natalie stared at him, stunned. "Cameron, that would be amazing, but it would cost a fortune." "It would be worth every penny," Cameron said. "You have a gift, Natalie, not just for creating art, but for helping others understand and appreciate it. Why not share that with kids who need it most?" Tears welled in Natalie's eyes. "You really believe in me that much?" "I believe in you more than you know," Cameron said softly. He took her hands in his. "These past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of any grand adventures or exciting events, but simply because I got to spend them with you. You've taught me that it's possible to trust again, to open my heart again, to believe that not everyone will use vulnerability as a weapon." "You've taught me the same thing," Natalie whispered. "You've shown me what real partnership looks like, what it means to be with someone who supports rather than diminishes." Cameron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Natalie's breath caught, but Cameron quickly shook his head. "This isn't what you think. Well, not yet anyway." Oh. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring with a small sapphire that glowed with an inner light. "This is a promise ring," Cameron explained. "A promise that I'm committed to building something real with you, at whatever pace feels right. A promise that I'll never rush you or pressure you. And a promise that when we're both ready, when we've built a foundation strong enough to support forever, I'll ask you properly to be my partner in life." A promise of forever. Natalie looked at the ring, then at Cameron's face, seeing nothing but sincerity and hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes to the promise. Yes to building something real together. Yes to taking our time and doing this right." Cameron slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the gallery surrounded by Natalie's art, surrounded by proof of her growth and healing. "Thank you," Natalie whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For seeing me when I felt invisible. for defending me when I couldn't defend myself, for being patient while I learned to trust again, for believing in me when I struggled to believe in myself. Cameron pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. You don't need to thank me for any of that. Loving you isn't a favor. It's a privilege. The word hung in the air between them. Love. Neither had said it before, both too cautious, too wounded by past betrayals. But now it felt right, felt true. I love you too, Natalie said. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you listen and the way you challenge me to be better. I love that you share your vulnerabilities and never use mine against me. I love you, Cameron West. They kissed, and around them, the gallery full of guests erupted in applause. Rachel whistled loudly, and Benjamin raised his champagne glass in a toast. Diana Chen wiped away happy tears, and several buyers decided to purchase additional paintings on the spot, caught up in the romantic atmosphere. Epilogue. 6 months later, the community art center buzzed with activity as children laughed and painted and created. Natalie walked through the bright space, stopping to offer encouragement and guidance. The program she and Cameron had created had exceeded all expectations, serving over 200 children in its first 6 months. Cameron stood in the doorway, watching her work with a smile. His sister Sophie had flown in from Boston for the weekend and stood beside him, observing the scene. She's wonderful, Sophie said. I can see why you fell for her. She saved me as much as I helped her, Cameron replied. We saved each other, really. That evening, they all gathered at Cameron's penthouse for dinner. Natalie had officially moved in 2 weeks earlier, her belongings blending seamlessly with his, in a space that now felt like home to both of them. As they sat around the table, sharing food and stories and laughter, Natalie thought about how much her life had changed in less than a year. She thought about that awful night at the Ashton Gala, about Trevor's cruel words and the crushing weight of humiliation. She thought about Cameron walking across that ballroom, about the kiss that had shocked everyone, about the choice she'd made to trust a stranger who offered genuine kindness. Trevor had meant to destroy her that night, to reduce her to nothing in front of everyone who mattered in his world. Instead, he had inadvertently set her free. He'd pushed her toward someone who truly deserved her, someone who celebrated her strength instead of trying to break it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Natalie and Cameron stood on his balcony, looking out at the city lights. The promise ring on her finger caught the glow from inside the apartment, and Natalie smiled at the sight of it. What are you thinking about? Cameron asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I'm thinking about how grateful I am, Natalie. Said not for what Trevor did, but for what came after. I'm thinking about how darkness makes the stars visible. I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings. Cameron kissed her temple. I'm thinking the same thing. And I'm thinking that 6 months from now, I'm going to ask you a very important question. Just giving you fair warning. Natalie laughed and turned in his arms. 6 months, huh? That's oddly specific. I'm a planner, Cameron said with a grin. Plus, I want to give you time to prepare an answer. No pressure, though. The answer is yes, Natalie said softly. Ever since that night, you reminded me of my worth. Ever since you stood beside me and refused to let me face my demons alone. Yes, Cameron. To whatever comes next. Yes. They kissed as the city sparkled below them. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something bright together. Their journey hadn't been perfect. It had disagreements and moments of doubt, times when old wounds threatened to derail new happiness. But they'd worked through each challenge with honesty and patience, building something real and lasting. Trevor Ashton's attempt to humiliate Natalie Harper had backfired spectacularly. He'd lost his reputation, several business deals, and the respect of many in his social circle. More importantly, he'd lost something precious that he'd never truly valued. And now he'd never get it back. Meanwhile, Natalie had gained everything that mattered. She'd discovered her strength, pursued her dreams, found meaningful work that changed children's lives, built a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine love. The stars cannot shine without darkness, quoted said. And Natalie had learned that truth through lived experience. Her darkest moment had led to her brightest beginning. Her greatest humiliation had preceded her most profound healing, and the man who had tried to make her feel worthless had inadvertently led her to someone who helped her recognize her own value. As they headed back inside, hand in hand, Natalie took one last look at the night sky. Somewhere out there, stars were being born in clouds of cosmic dust. Somewhere out there, light was breaking through darkness. And right here, in this moment, Natalie Harper was exactly where she needed to be, with exactly who she needed to be with, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The never-ending story of her life had taken an unexpected turn that night at the gala, and every chapter since had been better than the last.